So James, before we got started, you were yelling at me because I had not seen the
Yes.
movie Groundhog Day. Tell
So
me,
Groundhog Day just passed, and the reason why it reminded me of this because I watched the movie recently. It's one of the best movies of all time, and you have just revealed the fact that you haven't seen it. And now I want all of our listeners to yell at you and shame you because you haven't seen this movie. And hopefully I'm not alone in this. I can't see myself being alone in this. It's a classic, but you
oh,
need to watch Ground.
I know that.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
one of those, like, I've seen like the Truman Show. I feel like it's one of those types of movies. Like it's in that,
So
obviously it's very different, but it's in that same vein, like not like cult classic, but you should see it, but not everyone's seen it for whatever reason.
okay. You should not be one of those people that haven't seen it, and you should be one of those people who have seen it. And I told you I wanted a book report by tomorrow. But I'll settle for next week. We come on the show and talk about how you've seen it and loved it and what you loved about it. Is that
I'll
fair?
I'll do my best. So a month ago, John was like, "Oh, I haven't bartended a lot, and there were a bunch of shifts open for the middle of February." So I was like, "Oh, I should totally just grab a bunch of those." Like, great, it's like a bunch around like the same time. They're all this week, so I
Great.
essentially I'm working like 2 weeks in 1 week between both jobs. Completely my fault. So I'm working from Wednesday to Sunday. I have 4 of those nights. I have off Friday, so I'll see when I can squeeze a movie in.
Friday.
We we'll see what I have time for. I did not think this through. I was just like, "Oh yeah, I'll take that one. I'll take that one." Yeah, big. We'll see how I am when we record next week on Monday.
Well,
How I'm doing.
the reason why we got to Groundhog Day before the show started was because when John hopped on, I said immediately, well, it's Groundhog Day again, indicating the fact that it feels like we're doing this thing all over again, where it's 2 steps forward for the Islanders and then 2 steps back because it was, and we won't get into it just yet, but it was a good start to the Bo Horvat era. And then it quickly died off. And we can talk about that a little bit later, but we have some things to talk about first.
Absolutely, and it's I think 2 steps back is generous, and we'll figure that
Sure.
out
Yeah.
shortly. I think where I wanted to start, and I kind of anticipated a few more trades happening just because there was a lot of um, on the NHP Twitter account. There was a lot of different trending players
Yeah.
um, in trade rumors and different things. And last week, Vladimir Tarasenko linked to the Islanders one way or another. Who knows whether or not Lou and is it Doug Armstrong in St. Louis?
It is.
The Armstrong and Lamoriello actually add any conversation of substance other than "Are you interested?" "Yeah, I'm interested," and hung up the phone. But linked to the Islanders really for a while.
Yeah.
Maybe the length that we've been doing the show has been rumored. Tarasenko to the Islanders was former future blah 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 Islander.
Well, it's
But
it's definitely been, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. It's definitely been though, at least the last 2 years in which he's had that trade request pending because he never
that's
took it
true.
back. And for Tarasenko, the Islanders were on his approved list of teams he would go to
Right.
because he had a full no trade clause. So, but go ahead.
Yeah. So now he's in New York, just
Yeah.
across the East River. What do you make of that as far as, and then the Devils and Hurricanes are surely going to respond given where they are in the standings, and um surely almost making the playoffs at this point, given the Islanders, the Penguins, the Capitals, and the Sabres are all doing themselves a disservice all at the same time, not playing very well. So it's like almost no one wants to make the playoffs. So the top of that division is almost a little, it is as secure as it's going to be.
Oh yeah.
Um, the I think it goes almost beyond the season, and without getting into too much detail about what the Islanders need to do, or maybe we do get into that. How do the Islanders kind of respond to this? Does it
Let's talk about what the trades look like for the range. Well, what the trade looks like for the Rangers first, and what maybe the Devils and the Hurricanes need to do in order to respond. Maybe some general NHL talk, and then we can get into the Islanders, right? But
sure?
I mean, all of this affects the Islanders greatly in the grand scheme of things. I mean, you look at the Tarasenko trade, which in my opinion, I don't know if you saw the return for Tarasenko and Nico Mikkola, who was that was not an insignificant throw-in. That was a pretty significant add-on to Vladimir Tarasenko going to the Rangers. But right away, you look at the top line for the Rangers now. It's Tarasenko, Zibanejad, and Artemi Panarin. It's like
That's
just
crazy. That is a
just on
crazy first line.
correct, and just on paper, it looks exactly how you just reacted. It's like, oh my god. But then you really you get into it and you see what happens in the first 2 minutes of Tarasenko's tenure as a New York Ranger. Oh, pucks in the back of the net at the hands of Vladimir Tarasenko. So now you're immediately like, yep, this is going to be a problem. And, even further, into this, zooming the lens in a little more, the Rangers didn't even put Tarasenko on their first unit power play. He's on the second unit. They already had a pretty lethal first unit, so they didn't need him up there. And now you're like, wow, this team has two really good power plays with at least two triggermen in Zibanejad and now Tarasenko on the second unit. And they can pretty much score at will, which, by the way, they are. They've scored 12 goals in their last two games. The second game against the Hurricanes, who they shellacked in Carolina, Artemi Panarin benefits from Tarasenko on his line by scoring 4 goals. Now, Tarasenko didn't have any points on any of them, shockingly, but the point here is that look how much room having Tarasenko opened up for Panarin.
Is
That's insane.
so I mean, they're having a lot of success together, and it's definitely going to help them in the playoffs, which you need scoring, you need that depth. Certainly, two different power play looks and triggermen, as you said, is amazing. But for the Rangers, have you heard anything about them re-signing Tarasenko after this year? And does it have more to do with how the playoff run goes as opposed to? And this is a team that went to the Eastern Conference Final last year, right? That's in the Rangers. So they have a lot to prove. There's a hump to get over. And the East, in the Atlantic Division, those top three teams, as we're talking about the top three teams in the Metro, are also no slouches. The Leafs are going to leaf, I guess. Tampa Bay is still very good. And then you have the Boston Bruins, who've lost 2 games this season. More than that. But it seems like
that's what it feels like.
Games. And Olmark, at the very least, has only lost 3 games this season, which is just ridiculous. Is this a Rangers team looking to re-sign Tarasenko? Have you heard anything about them re-signing him?
Yeah, not from my own sources or anything like that, but I believe Elliot Freeman indicated himself that he did believe that the intent was to sign Vladimir Tarasenko to an extension. He doesn't think that they give up the first round pick without that intent. Now, it's going to be difficult for them because I don't have their cap friendly up at the moment, but I surely can bring it up because I know they have a couple of contracts that are set to expire very soon. They have after this season, obviously Tarasenko is one, but then they have Filipino, who is on a real tear right now. He's seemingly scoring at will as well. Alexis Lafreniere has a contract that he needs to resign. If they still have this player, Vitaly Kravtsov needs to resign a contract. Julien Gauthier, who isn't as important, but is still a contract they need to get figured out. But then you look at K'Andre Miller. That's going to be another pretty penny too. And they need a backup goaltender after Yaroslav Halak because he's going to be an unrestricted free agent. So there's a lot of contracts here to figure out. And they'll have in cap space this summer only $16,000 plus, right? 16,000, almost 100,000, 16,100,000.
I was gonna say that's a very different situation.
Sorry. 60
The
million, one
math
hundred
the
thousand
math ain't
dollars.
math in there, bud.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I was I misspoke. 60 million, $100,000 to re-sign all of these players. And Tarasenko is 31. Is he looking to cash in one more time? Not really sure, but Heedle's going to. You just look, you see what the Buffalo Sabres just signed in both Tage Thompson and Dylan Cozens. You can definitely compare Phil Heedle to a Dylan Cozens contract, and that's going to command upwards of $7 million. Lafreniere will probably get a bridge. We'll see what happens with Kravtsov, but you look at Keandre Miller, you could see him getting $4 or $5 million. So that's already putting them behind the eight ball here in order to resign Tarasenko. So I think it ultimately will somehow happen, just not sure how. And then keep in mind, not this summer, but the following, Capocacco will need to be re-signed as well, and they could re-sign him on July 1st if they'd like, because he'll be eligible at that time. But there's a lot of contracts to get figured out here, so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Now, in the same breath, Artemi Panarin, when he signed with the Rangers to begin with, took less money to play there. So, with the chance that Tarasenko can stay with Panarin and play with, his best friend, his countryman, and this great chemistry, maybe he will. But in the right now, and as far as what the rest of this season looks like, I already had the Rangers making the playoffs, and now with Tarasenko in the fold, and make no mistake, Mikkola was a really significant add-in as well. I hate to say it, but they're a favorite.
I don't I don't think that's a stretch. Again, this is a team that has some good playoff experience and very recent. So these players, these young players, already have a lot like some of the Islanders' younger players. Although now kind of been some time for them. And I guess without going into a lot of detail like we did with the Rangers on the Devils and the Hurricanes, really because I think Timo Meyer is on both of their radars. Um, if either one of those teams gets Timo Meyer, or Timo Meyer goes to one and they go after another player. And that could be Barbashev, that could be literally anybody. Um, Although obviously those two players are not on the same playing field. I just want to be perfectly clear. What does that mean for the Islanders? And then I ask about Tarasenko and getting re-signed because that really kind of sets the Islanders up, not only because I don't think at this point they're going to make the playoffs, but in the future, what what's the plan? Like I I don't even really know what the question is. I guess I'm not really sure where this team goes, and it does kind of
Yeah.
bleed into the buy or sell and kind of that aspect to it. But you're seeing all these teams around you kind of do this, and maybe the question is like, so maybe you do make the playoffs. Do you think just your identity, which I don't really know what it is anymore, do you think your identity is just going to carry you through like that? Maybe that's the core of what this part of the conversation is.
The thing is, for me, look, the Devils are going to add, and the Hurricanes are going to add, and those are already the Rangers, the Devils, and the Hurricanes are three teams ahead of the Islanders. They're, before these trades, better than the Islanders, and they're definitely going to add. I'll tell you this right now regarding Timo Meyer. I can't tell you what's on the table, but the Devils already have a better offer, and the Islanders are not. And the reason why I say it's better, that not that the Islanders have one, the Islanders can't match already what is on the table for Timo Meyer. Obviously, nothing has happened yet, but um, the Carolina Hurricanes are said to like Timo Meyer too, and they might get into a bidding war with New Jersey, and it's something the Islanders are not going to be able to sustain. Right? They're not going to be able to be a part of that. As far as what they do moving forward, that was the question, right? You wanted to know, like, how do they handle the upcoming trade deadline?
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna go into buy or sell. So that I think that was a good top level information. It was just what do they do? Like, do they think that say they do magically go on a run, right? They win a bunch of games. They're winning every um, 2 games for every 1 moving forward, which is what they really need to do, or every 4 out of 5 or whatever the case is, and they make the playoffs. You have to beat good teams
Well, right.
in the playoffs. Do they really think they can compete with not only just this roster, but with how this is interesting. Not just with this roster and what it's really capable of on the positive end, but with how bad they're capable of playing. And they're capable of doing that over 4 games. Now, a
Yeah.
goaltender can steal you a series, but, we've seen Sorokin really, drop a bad game against the Canucks.
Yeah.
Varlamov, kind of the same thing against the Canadians. The teams in front of the goalies on those nights were also not very good, but do they really? And I don't like, this is our take on it, right? Like, from where you sit, can they compete with that? So
Well, no. Right.
yeah,
And
they're
that's
playing the wild card, right? So you're playing who? Boston or the Hurricanes? Are you
correct.
in the same
Or
league
the
as
Devils.
these, or the Devils? Um, because they've been on a heater. They're 8-2, the Devils lately.
They're playing very well.
Are you even in the same league as these teams? Because you're not talking about like, oh, we can catch Washington and we're better than those teams, and okay, that's awesome. Turns out though, you just need to be better than them to make the playoffs, and then you need to survive the rest of it. And they've done that, but the rest of the divisions weren't nearly as good, and the Islanders had more of an identity.
I'll say this
And
though. I'll say this because you're right. Like we're sitting here and we're saying, are they in the same league as these other teams? Now, this upcoming week is going to be very indicative, right? They play Ottawa next, but following that schedule, it's Pittsburgh, it's Boston, it's I believe LA is in there,
Pittsburgh
uh,
again.
Pittsburgh again, right? All teams that are very good um, teams currently and are playoff bound, right? I think the Kings are in the Chikrin mix, right? These are all teams that are going to add and get better once the playoffs hit. So this week will be very indicative as to whether or not the Islanders can keep pace with teams like this. Now, it doesn't look very good because let's take a look at the last 2 games that they played against the Vancouver Canucks, who are in a shitstorm, and the Montreal Canadiens, who are rebuilding. They were without the majority, I believe, of their roster. I think they had like 12 players or something injured the last time the Islanders played them on what was it, Sunday afternoon or Saturday afternoon.
Saturday afternoon. They had a bunch of injuries. 12 would be
They
excessive,
did.
but they have a lot. They have
So
a ton. They have a ton of injuries.
right. And so just you look at the way they lost, right? They went up, they had a 2-goal lead against Vancouver, and then they I think they gave up 4 straight to lose 6-4. They
Six
couldn't
five.
6-5. They couldn't close the door on the Montreal Canadiens, who it's
That game
for
was terrible.
lack of a better term, that's an AHL team right now.
That was hard to watch. It
And
was
whether
so
the
slow. Like the
whether
game was bad.
correct, and whether the overtime goal was controversial or not, the fact of the matter is they shouldn't even have gotten that far. They
That's
should have closed the door.
that's primarily it this season, right? Where you're like, even last year, oh, it's this excuse, and like, I don't know. How many times have I said like, you're just a professional team,
Figure
figure
it
it
out.
out?
Now
Yeah,
here's
like,
the other
how
thing
do you
though.
do that?
Now here's the other thing, and maybe our questions will be answered as soon as tonight when they play the Senators. And you know what? That's probably not true because you probably do need to move on to the more formidable opponents that are ahead. But we haven't seen Lane Lambert show any emotion yet, and that's something that did happen. He lost his cool, right? Allen just dropped that game in overtime, slams the door open, tries to compose himself again. His post game presser, he had a little bit to say. And then this morning, or Monday morning at morning skate, according to everyone that was there reporting on it, he hit them hard. He skated them hard. He was pretty aggressive in his tone and in his uh, practice. I guess coordinating his practice, and there was anger. There was anger behind his tactics, which
What took
you
him so
know,
long? Are
yeah,
you
that's a good
kidding
question.
me? Like,
That's a
and
good
this is
question.
this is where, like, and I don't think Barry, like I know the guy. I don't think Barry Trotz did this, right? I don't know that. I don't know that he did or didn't. Some of the reporters that are actually there, I can just go through some old tweets. It would take a little bit, but maybe he didn't need to do that. Like, at what point this season was Lambert satisfied with what was happening? How do you just let it get to this point without any I understand on the bench. You want to keep your composure in front of your players, and that's leadership. Fine. Behind closed doors or on a practice rink, you got to lean into them. Where's the and again, you don't know what's happening in like video review rooms and truck talk kind of thing. Like, we don't know what's going on there. But
You know,
why did it take so long?
I look at the schedule and I look at who they lost to last month, and it was everybody but Vancouver and Montreal. And then the last two games were Detroit and Vegas, who they wound up winning. Those were some pretty good games for them. But they lost to everyone else, not named Vancouver and Montreal. They only beat those two teams. Right? They beat up on Vancouver 6-2 in Vancouver. They only won 2-1 at home against the Canadians, but they won. Everyone else, Toronto, Washington, Boston, Buffalo, uh, Minnesota, Dallas, like
They lost
these are
bad.
all
They didn't just lose games either. They
yeah,
didn't. They looked like these last two games, maybe not quite this
correct.
bad, but it wasn't good. And I think it was in a Kurz article. I believe it was another a league executive that had mentioned, after the break, you have Horvat, and it gives the team a false sense of security that, oh, okay, we fixed it, we got our guy,
Right.
and the locker room is like, okay, great. And then I don't know how you go into those games, and that's I continue to question Lambert and then the player leaders on this team. Where are they? What
Yeah.
is Anders Lee doing? Is Clutterbuck being out of the lineup is not an issue, right? It's not because Andy Green isn't there. It's not because Char isn't there. What is going on that bench and in that locker room? Like, how do you do that, right? Because that means, and that's why I zoom out. I believe a few weeks ago, maybe last month, we talked about this. About I give them less of a pass on last season with every loss this year because it's okay. This isn't different. Maybe it was just the roster that was bad. Yes. Did some factors come into play? Sure. But they were in ninth place. They were 7 wins. Like, they weren't very far away from making the playoffs. It's 1 win a month. I don't know how many times I said that over the summer. It was win a month different of them making the playoffs. I think this team is just bad. Like, and
So
I think it's a top down thing. I really think it's the leadership from, in this case, Lambert and the captains.
so this is really where I want to see how they perform following the practice Monday morning. But it's funny that you mention this because in the same breath, I did see earlier today this statistic with the GIF. Do you remember or did you see
Whoa,
when
hold on. GIF?
GIF, what is it?
Come on.
Come on, just say it.
It's GIF.
All right, GIF,
It's I
whatever.
think people say it both ways, but
All right, so then
I
give
just wanted to
so then give me some credit.
I will not.
All right. Um I don't know if you saw the GIF
Thank you.
of when the New York Rangers actually were in a spot where they weren't playing very well. And it led up to a boiling point for their captain, Jacob Trouba. Now, whether you like him or you hate him, and for whatever reason you like him or hate him, that doesn't matter. Put that aside. But there was a game where the Rangers were getting beat up on, and he took his helmet off after getting thrown out of the game out of frustration and slammed it on the ice and, skated angrily off. And since then, they're like, and don't quote me on the exact statistic, but it's something similar to like 19-4-1 since then, which is significant.
It's
So
almost like when St. Louis, like, didn't they like fight in each other in a practice? I don't.
I
I
think
do
that was
not
when,
suggest anybody fighting on the Islanders. Like, but
was
didn't
that
then
like
they won the cup?
right? Yeah, like right before Ryan Reeves got traded, I think. Like the season before. I think you're right. I think there was tensions at a Blues practice or whoever, whichever championship team that was that season. There was definitely tensions at practice that boiled over, and they wound up benefiting from it somehow. And I'm not sitting here saying, look, Anders Lee needs to throw a fucking fit. What I'm saying is that there needs to be some sort of accountability checked here at the door. And it seems like it might have started with Lambert. Let's see if it does anything. But if it doesn't, and people are or the players are lax on the ice, let's say, you got to start seeing some emotion from Anders Lee, from God forbid, Josh Bailey, because you can't accept, a lackadaisical play on the ice that leads to a turnover and a goal against. And that's largely what's been happening here.
Yeah, and
So
Lambert's coaching for his job, and if they don't respond, especially against a team like Ottawa, right? You can get your swagger back, and then you got Pittsburgh, Boston, Pittsburgh, Winnipeg, L.A., Winnipeg. That's it. I mean, the season could be over well before that at this point, but regardless of making the playoffs or not, you got to go play those games. And if
right.
they don't, frankly, if they lose against Ottawa, I think Lambert gets fired. I think we wake up Wednesday or Thursday.
Whoa.
I think he loses the room. If he goes out in that practice and he yells and screams, I'm picturing some of my old coaches throwing garbage cans or whatever they were doing. But if he goes in that practice and leans into them, and that team goes out and lays an egg against Ottawa, I don't make predictions. I don't think I've ever done that on this show. I don't think I've done that in an article. I don't think I've sent a tweet like this ever. I don't think I've said this in passing to somebody. I do not think that Lambert makes it to Friday against the Penguins. I honestly don't. I don't know how Lamoriello does that,
Heard
especially
it here
with.
first.
Yeah, I I don't because I don't think it's likely that that's going to happen. But like I can't see that happening. That doesn't make sense to me, especially if there's a Bruce Boudreau out there. Talk about turning teams around. That's kind of like I think he's a different coach than Barry Trotz, but he's done a lot of the same things that Trotz did. I think he's capable of that as far as turning the team around. Now, Boudreau has not won a goddamn thing. So for what all the good he's done in the regular season, it has not led to anything, including with the Capitals. It took Barry Trotz until his fifth year of being with the Capitals to finally get that team over the hump. But when you do have a good coach out there like that, and not to just recycle these players, and I think they did a good thing with giving Lambert a shot, somebody was going to do it, right? He was going to coach an NHL team at some point, whether that was this season or very soon. I don't know how. I mean, is that crazy to think? Or Lamoriello's done crazier things than that. Maybe that's for some perspective here, right?
Yeah.
I just can't see Lambert leaning into it, and then the players just don't respond. I think that shows that he's lost the room. You can't lose to Ottawa on
Yeah.
a
I mean,
lot of levels at this point.
you're right. And that's definitely interesting coming from you, but you might not be far off there at all. Um, and we're talking about Lambert's coaching style and trying to keep players accountable and whatnot. And I'm looking at a video right now of Rick Tocchet, who's now in Vancouver and trying to hold his players accountable. Now, albeit it's a different situation, he's a new coach for that team, and he's trying to set the tone. I get it, but maybe this should have been the way it was from the get go for the Islanders with Lambert. We'll see how it plays out. But he has this team after practice is over on their hands and not knees, on their feet in push-up position. They cannot drop to their knees. Crawling or walking on their hands from blue line to blue line. And the quote is he wants them to reach another level of fitness. This is the team that just beat the Islanders a few days ago. Maybe they have to consider starting to do some things like this.
It's kind of, it reminds me of Lamoriello. Obviously, it's on the ice tactics versus shave every day, right? Prepare, do things you don't want to do, common enemy, whatever whatever his ultimate tactic is there, and then how he's kind of doing it, the means to his end. But they really, really need some Lamoriello kind of uh, swift justice on the ice. I don't know if Lamoriello comes down and talks to the players. I'm sure he talks to the leadership on the team with or without Lambert, together. And I'm not suggesting that the captains would speak ill of their coach behind his back, right? I don't know how those meetings go. I imagine the leadership of the team talks to the general manager, the president and general manager of the New York Islanders, and probably a lot of teams. But I don't know. Short of Lamoriello like getting on skates or behind the bench during a practice and whip, like I don't know what happens. I Rick Tocchet is also an interesting character. I'm not exactly sure if we should be taking cues from that, but it's kind of like Tortorella. It's that kind of thing, and I don't think the Islanders are quite that bad, but something's got to change. This isn't necessarily a fitness thing, but I understand where you're going.
No, yeah, it's not about the
It's
fitness level. It's about the holding players accountable level. Do things like you said that you don't want to do. You don't want to do these tomorrow. Show me in the game,
yeah,
and we won't do this tomorrow
it's almost like Herb Brooks style, like
again,
again, again, and just
again.
getting them to be a team again, right? I think they're a tight locker
Right?
room. I think they do play for each other, but there's I if the theme of this season for me is lack of focus. That's simply it. It was
Yeah.
they couldn't start games, then they couldn't end games. Now they can't end games again. Now it's 23 giveaways against the Canucks. One of them being terrible. If yeah, actually that was in the Canadiens game. The Barzell ultimately lost them the game. Um, he was out there for almost 3 minutes of that overtime, and just made a bad play. But this is a
We
team
say
too.
that. I just want to quickly interject. We do say that, but in overtime, if Lambert deployed him that way, it's not on him.
He's also
It could
stayed
be.
on longer. I've seen him stay on longer than now. Granted, I can't hear what's happening, but like
Correct.
you could see him stay on a little long sometimes, and you could see when he's out of
Again,
gas.
it all depends on what the agreement is between player and coach. Like, you're our best guy, 3-on-3, more ice. We need you out there. All depends. You could be right. I'm not taking that away from you.
Sure.
I just want to note that it is entirely possible because I see the Devils do it with Jack Hughes. They had him out there for literally 7 straight minutes at one point, which was insane. He broke the
Against the
record.
Islanders. Yeah, it was 6 minutes or whatever it
It
was.
was it was insane. That sort of thing does happen. But you could be 100% right, and he's taking that liberty of staying on a little bit longer because he's hungry. He wants to be the guy. I get it. Should he have made that mistake? No, if that is the mistake he made. But there is the other side of it.
Yeah, and I think
Continue.
what's with the giveaways and the bad defense and the lack of focus, this is a team that scored 3 or more goals in each of the last 3 games, and they lost 2 of them. This is an Islanders team that's known for their defense. If this team scores 3 goals, they should win that game. Frankly, if they score two most of the time, but if they score three, especially if they're leading after two, which of late they've not done very well. They've lost 5 of the last 11 games. I'm trying to recall the Eric Hornick tweet. Of course, he has all the answers, but they're like 4-2-5 in the last number of games where they've led after 2 periods. That's kind of unacceptable. This is a
4-5-2.
4-5-2. That's worse. I would
I
prefer to have been.
believe.
I would have preferred to be wrong on that, but yeah, that's terrible. whatever. Either way, they've lost a lot of games. They lost 7 games after whether it's overtime or not. After when leading after 2 periods. That's terrible. So it kind of goes back to the start of the conversation with, is this really a team that's even ready to go to I don't think can make the playoffs till they want. It'll be 2007 where they just get blown out in the first round and who cares? It wasn't worth it. You may as well just, I don't want to say you tank, but it's kind of like last year. Like, well, I don't know what Lamorello's thinking or any of that, but and maybe before we get in that discussion, let's take a quick break. We'll come back on the other side. We'll talk about buying or selling, and we'll be able to continue this conversation.
Yeah, we'll continue. Just want to clarify. I found the statistic. It's 4-2-3 in the last 9 that they've led through 2 periods. Nassau Hockey is brought to you by DraftKings. The action never ends at DraftKings Sportsbook, especially this summer. With tons of ways to bet on all your favorite sports, you can fuel your fandom and feel the heat of the season like never before. Plus, right now, DraftKings Sportsbook is giving new customers a risk-free bet at up to $1,000. That's right, make your first bet up to $1,000, and if it doesn't win, you'll get another shot to cash in. You can throw down on all major action for baseball, golf, MMA, and more. Plus, with same-game parlays, spreads, money lines, over-unders, and props, your betting options feel endless. You know this summer, we're going to bet on Aaron Judge, who just re-signed with the New York Yankees, to hit plenty of home runs. Best of all, DraftKings is safe, secure, and reliable. You can deposit and withdraw your cash whenever you'd like. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now, use promo code THPN, make your first deposit, and get a risk-free bet up to $1,000. That's promo code THPN, only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. See show notes for details. Nassau Hockey is also brought to you by Raycon. This time of year, everyone's talking about making big changes, which is all well and good, but most of the time, pretty unrealistic. For example, if you're an NHL team that's not making the playoffs but want to trade for a big player, why are you going to risk your future? However, I've actually found that the smallest changes to your routine can make the biggest impact. In the same way, you don't have to break the bank to make a big deal purchase. Even the smallest things can be part of a big change if it's something that you use every day, like my Raycons. Raycon is premium audio at the perfect price point, so you can build great habits without breaking the bank. Now, whenever I'm cooking my meals, I wear my Raycons, and I have the noise cancellation so that when I'm trying to concentrate on my recipe, I can tune everything out. Whether you're looking for a pair of everyday earbuds, low latency gaming headphones, or a speaker with a battery that will last all night at your next party, Raycon's got you covered. And yep, you guessed it, Raycons start at half the price of other premium audio brands. So you don't have to choose between products. You can get one of each, or a pair and a spare, and still pay less than you would with other brands. Even if you know you'll love your Raycons as much as I do, Raycon wants to make sure you feel great about your purchase. They offer buy now, pay later options, and every purchase has an easy and free return guarantee. My favorite features on my Raycons are the noise isolation mode like I mentioned earlier, or the awareness mode when you can still listen to your audio and hear everything going on outside of the audio. So you ready to buy something small with a big impact? Go to buyraycon.com/THPN today to get 15% off your Raycon order. That's buyraycon.com/THPN to score 15% off. buyraycon.com/THPN.
So on the other side of the break, we started our discussion a little bit, or I started our discussion a little bit on buying or selling. And what many would call, and I think I would agree, of last year of not making any significant trades at the deadline, selling off assets. I don't know that I would include Varlamov in that, but maybe some other players where you're opening up cap space and at least giving some players some room. What do you think the Islanders do at this point as far as buying or selling? Should they do both? Is it kind of clearing some space where you can adding a player if they're available, if you have the assets, and then you don't need to make the offseason deal for a UFA or trading for an RFA and trying to sign them? Where does this team go from here?
Yeah, the good news is that although they shit the bed the last 2 games, the teams ahead of them did no better. So it was kind of like nothing happened. Now, do they have less time to do these things to make progress in the standings? Sure, but again, nothing really happened despite losing those 2 games standings wise.
Well, they've played so many more games than other
That
than
is
Washington.
true.
They've played one more game um than Washington, but they played 4 less games than Pittsburgh, and then they have 2 games against them.
4 more.
They played
They
4
played
more
f
games than Pittsburgh, and then they play them twice in the next week. Like,
Yeah,
those games are so much bigger than we're
yeah.
even giving them
They're
credit for.
Look, every game moving forward is must win. There's
Uh,
no
Against
sugarcoating
these
it
teams, against a Pittsburgh, when
against any
you're
team.
they're 1 point, yeah, but in particular, right? If you're fighting for a chance to make it to the playoffs. They do have a couple
Correct.
games against Washington near the end of the season as well. But right now, you have a team like the Islanders that they need to pull them out, and Pittsburgh's not playing particularly well. They're 5-2-3, but they've lost one. Um, Recently, yeah, they're not playing out of this world good, but continue.
Right. So, my point here is that standings wise, not much shift has happened here. So they're in the same spot now. Again, like I said earlier in the show, I'd like to see how they respond after some tough love from Lane Lambert. But the thing is, look, if they're out of it by the time March 3rd comes, they should be selling assets to recoup assets, right? There's no reason why they can't get a first round pick for Semyon Varlamov.
Do
There's
you?
no reson why
I
they
guess
can't
you
get
can
at
re-sign
least.
him in the offseason, but
You could. You figure that out later, right? Just like when Lamoriello said about signing Horvat, I'm not worried about the future. I'm worried about right now. You get your assets that you need to do one of two things. One, draft in one of the best drafts that's been spoken of since forever. And two, if you don't end up drafting, you can use those assets to flip and get other things that you need in order to add to this roster if you really think you're only 1 or 2 pieces away. So they can surely sell Varlamov. I believe they can get a first round pick easy. They can definitely get a high pick, a first or a second for Scott Mayfield. I don't see why not. They saw what Baldock looked like. Maybe he can step in somehow. Whatever. They have plenty of time to figure that out. Zach Parise, if he agrees to wanting to go, you look at what Lamoriello did for Chara and Green. They requested not to be traded. I could see Parise doing the same thing. But if he says, sure, I'll go, you get whatever you can for Zach Parise, which I wouldn't be surprised if somebody would pay a third round pick for him.
and he's somebody that you can bring back in the offseason, which I don't think any Islander fan would be upset about.
Sure, you can. But the path forward should be, if they're not in it, sell what you can to recoup assets to either use in the summer for yourself or trade off to bring in other assets that are available. The flip side of this is that, let's say for some reason this shellacking Lambert laid on the team was the turnaround of something and they go on this run. Well, yesterday I was listening to Frank Saravalli, who said, look, the Islanders are not in a great place right now. However, in talking to other GMs and coaches around the league, they all had the same thing to say, that when it comes to being in the playoffs, there's one team that they really just want to avoid and not play, and that is the Islanders, because they're built for that kind of hockey. They're built for a
Previously,
postseason.
I wonder
They're
how they
they're
respond under
still
Lambert.
they're still viewed as that team because they just grind. And that is still the consensus amongst other GMs, amongst other coaches. They are still viewed as that team that just grinds. And it's still they do. They work so hard for these goals and they grind the opponent down to the bitter end. It still happens. However, it's not exactly the same roster. You're right. They're still viewed as this.
It's
The
a different
addition of
coach.
Horvat,
That's my big thing. Their
it
identity
is a
is
different
different, and the
coach,
coach, the players or whatever. It's literally how they're playing the game.
but the addition of Horvat also makes them a little scarier. I mean, look, as bad as they've been, he scored in 3 of his 4 games, and the power play has been good. They've scored in the last 4 games. They've scored like way more. I don't know the statistic off the top of my head, but they've scored a lot more than they usually do. So
It's been better. They're still not. It could be even better than it is, even with with Horvat.
you're
But
right. But my point here is, I went on the record the other day to say after the Montreal loss, that could really put the stake in the season, right? That kind of loss to that kind of opponent, that's a point you left on the table that you really should have had the night or 2 nights before. You left 2 points on the table that you really should have had. Like, this doesn't scream playoff team to me.
yeah, and that's why I said on Saturday too. When I think it was still tied. I can't remember exactly. I don't think they were losing quite yet. I said if they lose this game, just stick a fork in them. That it's not. They're not a playoff team. Just the season's over. Go sell whatever. Just because you can't. You really can't lose that game. I'm still. First of all, it was such a bad game. I feel bad for. I mean, I guess if you paid and you were in Montreal and you're a Canadiens fan, that was great. But for any fan that traveled to that and saw that live, that was a disaster. That was such a terrible hockey game.
Yeah, wasn't great.
But that's like you said, they're not looking like they're a playoff team, and I think we said we would know this week one way or another if they were going to still be in the race. And after Eric Hornick had tweeted out the teams around the Islanders uh, losing, and that the Capitals beat Boston, and they lost to San Jose. Pittsburgh lost 6-0 to LA. Buffalo lost 7-2 on Saturday. So it could have been worse in Eric's words. And then somebody had retweeted that and added, this is Christoph _77. I don't know if they listen to the show, but figured give them the credit here. 17-8-1 gets the Islanders to 95 points. Right now, that number, this is as of a few days ago, I suppose. Right now, that number gets them in according to Money Puck. Tuesday versus Ottawa is a must win. I think that's on a lot of levels. But again, in the long run of the race, they need to win both games and not give any points away against Pittsburgh. If you lose in between, who do they play in between? Boston? Sure, drop that game. You have to beat Pittsburgh on both those other nights.
Right.
Sorokin needs to be playing out of his mind both of those nights. There's just no other way. And how many games is that remaining? That's just a lot of wins. 17 wins for this club. Now, granted, they won 4 in a row recently, right? That number presumably was a little higher. Granted, teams around them, yada yada. I don't really know how. Someone explained it to me. I think somebody actually DM'd me recently describing the cap and different things in the deadline space for something else. But Ryan was, what's his last name? Ryan Paulson, thank you, was mess DMing me explaining how the cap worked at the deadline. So I appreciate that. But yeah, I don't know how what's it called when they're getting into play, like that's the scary number or the something number.
The magic
The
number.
magic number. Yeah, the scary number. I have no idea how that the math just doesn't calculate to me. I'm not a numbers
Yeah.
guy. And people have explained it to me before. I'm sure someone's going to DM me, which is awesome. I love that. And maybe I can just dig deep in it. But I don't know. It just doesn't seem likely. The teams around them, Pittsburgh might add 2. They're a team like the
Maybe.
Islanders with just a terrible prospect system because they've just been going for it every single year. And you want eventually they're just not going to be able to do it. But They continue to stay in the race, and the Islanders have a lot of time off in between games moving forward because they've played a lot more than a lot of other teams. So having to sit at home and kind of watch the standings and watch teams kind of pull away is going to be tough. I have a feeling it'll look a lot like the standings did last year. I don't know that every team that makes the playoffs in the Eastern Conference gets 100 points, but it'll be, again, within 7 or 8 wins of them making the playoffs again, which is disappointing because that's not a lot of wins in this grand scheme of it. Again, it's a win a month, a little over a win a month, and considering who they've lost to, that could have just been the last 2 games that they played. Could have been 2 of them. So
Yeah.
that's rough. It makes every loss just makes the run that much harder. And when your schedule also gets harder, you're behind the 8 ball, to use a cliche. We kind of already touched on Lambert's time on Long Island coming to an end. I predict sooner than later. What do you think about after this season? So whether they make the playoffs or not, and maybe you can run through both scenarios. What do you think about Lambert's future at this team? They make the playoffs, say they lose in the first round. Has he done enough to show that he's capable of continuing to coach his team? Was there growth throughout this season? I'm inclined to say no, but what do you where do you see it?
I'll tell you right now, the thing is, a lot of Lambert's future hinges on Lamoriello's because, yes, he acquired Horvat, yet he's still on the hot seat. Like, if they don't get a playoff series in UBS Arena this year, I don't think he's back.
Lamoriello.
So, Lamoriello. So, the next guy who comes in has no ties to a guy like Lane Lambert. And you could easily see him bringing in his own guy, especially when there's someone out there by the name of Bruce Boudreau ready to be available behind anyone's bench.
Yeah, I'm not sure who else is available. I'm not sure there's somebody up and coming as far as a coach is concerned. I'm also not sure who's available to be a GM that's not named Chris Lamoriello. I don't know that that's necessarily possible. James, you raised your hand in the front row.
Barry Trotz is available for both positions.
Both positions. Yeah.
I'm
That
serious.
that would be something. I think
One or the other. Sorry, not both. One or the other. He would probably do both if he could. But I doubt that, or I shouldn't say I doubt, I'm sorry. I don't put it past him to do one of those things. Like, I don't think he wanted to go. And if it's not Lamoriello, look, he doesn't have any ill will towards Lamoriello. They've actually both been on the record that they're still friends. They talk all the time. I don't see why he wouldn't. He wants to be a GM. I know that.
it's possible. Although I do really want to see Kevin Weeks break his own news that he's becoming the next Islanders
That would be
GM. So
sweet.
yeah, I want to just put that energy out there so that maybe it would happen because I think that would be great.
And then I could say the New York Islanders GM follows me on Twitter.
It's all about the clout, baby. You gotta get the. It's all about the clout, and
Put
it's
that on a t-shirt. It's all about the clout, baby. Put it on a t-shirt.
and it's served you well, obviously. So
Yeah.
you're obviously just a bigwig now. So yeah, no, that's
Stop.
super working out. But like I would love for that to happen with Kevin Weeks, not only because that's a
That
good
would be
story,
cool.
and he would actually, I have a feeling, break his own news like that with
And it's another conversation in itself too, because it's one of those things where it's like, do you want someone new or do you want someone with experience to come in and really, put the Islanders in the direction they need to be in, yada yada. But I'm with you. I think that would be a really cool idea.
yeah. So I think that's part of ownership's decision, or Lamoriello if he's back. You have to look at what else is out there, which means you're really starting to think about that now. Think about any breakup um, that you've been through. It doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
It's a little bit of a period. It's not like necessarily that you're looking and you already have other options, But
Well, I'll tell you this:
once that plant is once this the plant is the seed is
seed is
planted, oh
planted.
my
You got
god,
it.
what is yeah.
Usually, when you grow tomatoes, you plant the seed
Yeah.
first, and then it grows.
Yeah, I'll feel free to just use as many words as I want here to get to the point. But once that's there anyway, where whatever order it's in, the it's kind of hard to undo it, right? Like
Yeah.
things are set in motion, the thoughts are set in motion. It's really hard to come back from that. So whether that's coming Ledecky and Malkin down or Lamorello down, it's hard to break the momentum there. And it really depends on, like I said, I really think that the Islanders drop this game. That's almost the most interesting part of Tuesday's game, tonight's game, whenever you're listening to this, is the fallout if they lose. I think heads roll. And that might
Oh, I just thought
I
of another. I just thought of another head coaching candidate,
ooh,
Andrew Brunette, who is the associate with New Jersey,
and he was with Florida, right?
and he was with them for the majority of that ridiculous President Trophy winning run. Now, I understand it was Joel Quinville at the beginning of the year, and then he got let go for the reasons he got let go of, and he had a really good team around him and everything, but he knows what they need in order to win. He's been there. He's done that. I know Devils fans are clamoring for him to become the head coach, although I'd pump the brakes there. I mean, look, and if he does, Lindy Ruff is going to be available.
That's it. I know you cover the Devils, so maybe pass this along. Maybe don't judge the coaching. You might not have a great beat on that, Devils fans. You were clamoring for Ruff to get fired earlier this season, and I don't know. I think you got a Jack Adams candidate on your hands,
Think they
considering
do.
where they started from this year. So maybe talk about pump the brakes. Maybe chill out on that.
Quite poetic.
Yeah, the justice for the poetic justice for Lindy Ruff
It's funny now. There's a
is
meme out
outstanding.
there. It's like a meter. It's like a red zone, a yellow zone, and a green zone, and the sections are labeled "Fire Lindy." Let's see where this goes. Resign Lindy, and that meter's all the way in the green.
Is
It's
is his contract up? Like, how long has he
yeah.
been with the team? So
After
that's
this,
interesting. That's
yeah,
interesting too. I don't know that he should coach the New York Islanders. It's funny if you're Lamoriello or the ownership of the Islanders. I wonder what direction you go. Right, you just tried somebody new. That did not go so well. Now it could have just been the wrong guy, which is probably more of the point, to be honest. But considering who Lamoriello is, and if he's back next season, you might go back with somebody more with more experience. So Lindy Ruff isn't the craziest thing in the world, but you have to go with recent success. It really depends on where the rest of the Devils season goes. If you're the Devils ownership and management, you probably want him back anyway. So it depends on, like I said, it depends on who's available, help that they think can actually move this team forward. That's not an easy decision. Again, you just went with somebody new that it really didn't work. Even if they make the playoffs this year, I wonder how much of it is Lambert and how much of it is the players kind of just picking themselves up here. But we have to see on kind of on the other side of this game in Ottawa. I'm kind of not excited about it. I'm going to be kind of watching Lambert at the best that I can
yeah.
throughout that game. Although it is on Valentine's Day, so I might be not paying attention quite as much because I have to make dinner and stuff. But I'll do the best that I can and paying attention to that during the game. But you wanted to touch on somebody the Islanders before we wrap it up here,
Yeah.
who the
So
Islanders were reportedly interested in that I had not seen.
yeah. So we just mentioned Kevin Weeks. So keep an eye on, and hopefully Weeksy sees this, right? Because he obviously watches our show. He's a friend of mine and the shows. Just kidding. Sort of, not really. But yeah, the Islanders are reportedly interested in Finnish defenseman Valtteri Puli. He's a 6'6" defenseman, previously undrafted. Marek explains, Jeff Marek, I was listening to him earlier today, that he's a 21-year-old late blooming defenseman that has shown significant improvement in his tools this season that give him some NHL hope. He's cited as a big bodied defender and is unafraid to use it while also defending well with plus skating. So, he's not going to blow you away offensively. I think he has something like 3 goals and 15 points in like 44 games in the top Finnish league. But 6'6" plus skating ability. I mean, look, if he's not going to come over and go right to the NHL. It's not like that. But if you can add young talent to this team, or to the prospect pool, even let's just call it that. If you can add young talent to the prospect pool, because let's face it, they just gave up their number 1 guy in a trade for Bo Horvat. Look, get whoever you can, however you can. And if this guy seems like he might have some sort of future, I understand he's a defenseman and we have a lot of those, but the Islanders also typically draft and develop really well in Bridgeport as far as blue liners go. So it is something to keep an eye on moving forward. He can't sign until his season ends in the Finnish league, and there are other teams that are interested in him, namely the Predators, the Canucks, Boston's in the mix too. There's a bunch of teams involved with this guy, but the Islanders are one of them. And you wonder if the chance to jump to the top of the prospect depth chart, prospect pool, entices him to get to the NHL quicker. You wonder if a new arena in UBS Arena entices him. And you wonder if the excitement of Matthew Barzal and Bo Horvat for the next 8 years excites him. So something to keep an eye on.
I wonder, just as you said, that the Islanders' defense and the prospects on the back end are in pretty good shape, even if they're not playing particularly well lately. You almost wonder if the scouts can try to track down some forwards. It's interesting that this is the news that comes out, being, considering you just had to trade Ratu and a season of Anthony Beauvillier and a first
Yeah.
round pick
Yeah.
that could have been a forward. It's interesting that, and maybe they are, scouting a bunch of forwards. Presumably they're scouting forwards one way or another, but it's interesting that this news kind of comes out. It may just be because this particular player is getting some attention, so there's just more news about it. But yeah, you hope that they can kind of stock the prospect pool in unconventional ways. You look at a lot of teams kind of figure that out. I don't know exactly what the Penguins prospect pool is. I know I mentioned them earlier. I think that it's not very good, being that they've made so many trades and traded picks and features for a very long time. But yeah, they have to restock one way or another. And a lot of good teams find a way to have that either undrafted or low draft pick kind of come in and make a difference. And
Yep.
for the Islanders, their good draft picks are not exactly killing it all the time. Wallstrom's still trying to figure it out. He's still injured. Now he's got to recover from that. That's definitely tough. Romanov,
Yep.
who they didn't draft, but they traded a draft pick for, presumably because he was a little further along. Even the other day said that he was playing a bad game, and it's something he's got to work on that. And he's not been flawless this season. I don't expect
Right.
anybody to be like that, but he's been far from it. He's trying to figure it out. Islanders play difficult systems, so it's Holmstrom is, I don't remember if he was a first round pick, but he was a
He
higher
was.
ish pick. Still, he's showing flashes of it, but it's not game breaking third line stuff, right? It's not the kid
Right.
line in New York or in Tampa or whatever. So they definitely have some work to do, but always cool when they can pry somebody away. They did it with Horvat. If they can do it with an undrafted player, that'd be very exciting as well.
Yeah, it
Any
was just, this was interesting. He's a guy who's, he wasn't on anyone's radar. His draft years passed him by, but suddenly in Liga, in the top league in Finland, started to develop into this. Suddenly, this guy might be a player. So, the word is there are a lot of teams and scouts impressed with him, and they see him as a project, but he could be something. And the Islanders are in the mix. So, I mean, look, 6'6" defenseman who could skate well. Yeah, I'd take a flyer on that. But
Yeah, and if
uh
you're gonna trade Mayfield possibly or not bring him back
yeah.
one way or another, it's nice to fill that pipeline. Grant Hunton's 27. He could probably fill in for a little bit. You do have a Bolduc. You do have a Wotherspoon. There's kind of some options. Salo still has an opportunity to kind of figure it out. I don't think he's a completely lost cause, even if he lost a spot on the roster this season. But always good to kind of stock the pond, so to speak, in Bridgeport.
Yeah. The last thing I just seeing this now, it's not related to the Islanders, but sort of is related to the Islanders, but not at all related to the Islanders. Is
This is
that
great so far.
yeah, so far it's awesome. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but nobody's been able to find Dustin Bufflin. He's seemingly been off the grid for since he retired, but uh Andrew Ladd posts on his Instagram that he got him back on the ice for the first time in what looks just like a beer league game, and that this is the first picture I'm seeing of Dustin Bufflin uh since he retired years ago. Was it 5 years now?
It feels like a long time. I'm not entirely sure. And you have to remember, not you, but I mean the royal you, everybody, that they played together in Winnipeg. And maybe even before
Correct.
that in
Correct.
wherever they came from, Atlanta. Before that, you remember the Atlanta Thrashers? It's like a
Yeah.
crazy thing to kind of go back. It's almost like when we were kids and in the early 2000s, like, oh, you remember there was a team in Winnipeg, and now
Dude,
it's
that
like, you
team
remember
was
there's a team in
actually
Atlanta.
like they had good pieces. They had Bufflin, Kovalchuk, Heatley, Hossa, um, Glad. Like they when in his prime, like they had so many good pieces to that team. Like
Ray Ferraro.
Ray
Uh,
Ferraro was on that
can you
team.
remember that?
I
They
can't believe that.
did they not have Chris Chelios for a second, like the very end of his
Uh,
career?
they might have. Evander Kane was there. The Stewart brothers were there. Like so many good players were on that team. I don't know how it lost its relevancy. I mean, I guess because they were in Atlanta was how they lost their relevancy. But that was a team, huh?
Yeah,
That was a thing that happened.
the Moose was there,
Yeah,
aka Johan Henberg, famed Pittsburgh Penguins goalie. That was like one of my favorite goalies in the early 2000s, mainly because I followed Darius Kasparaitis over and Henberg happened to be on the team. But yes, Chris Chelios played 7 games with the Atlanta Thrashers in his last season in the NHL. After a long stint, he played 46 games with the Chicago Wolves in 2009-10,
Chris
which
Chelios
is
did.
which is also a really long time ago now, and I hate
Really?
that.
Yeah,
Yeah, he played 48 games over 2 seasons in the AHL. Um, he was on some of those Detroit teams that he won a cup with them. Um, won 2 cups with them, in fact, and you almost remember him more as the Detroit Red Wing, which is very weird because growing up he was a mainstay in Chicago, and before that he won a cup um, with Montreal. He was in the league
yeah,
for ever. It was insane, 651 games. Um, we just got off on a tangent there, but yeah, Atlanta at the Atlanta Thrashers, they never had all of it together because they trade Kovalchuk. It's never all there at the same time. Near the end, it could have worked if they just kind of put it together, but it never quite worked out there. But that's probably about where we should wrap it up. Please rate,
yeah,
review, subscribe wherever you listen to or watch the show. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Aspen Hockey. You can find James work at the fourth period. Still taking a little bit of hiatus from writing. I might get back into it. I have an urge every once in a while to put up a blog post on our Substack, and then it goes away. So subscribe, and maybe you'll get a surprise in your inbox one of these days. In the meantime, the team at Isles Fix is putting together daily content for you straight into your inbox. James, right before the trade deadline, you called out Lamoriello, and then before the next episode, he made a move. What's
right.
your message for Lane Lambert before Tuesday's game?
Until next time, all, get your shit together.